76b at the Mishnah. Yesterday we saw the Mishnah discuss when two courtyards, two chatzeros, want to make a joint eruv, that they would have to have either an entryway or a doorway between them, or a window and the requirements of that window connection between the wall between the courtyards. Today we're going to see walls that don't have a window or a doorway, and various ways where that wall can, where in spite of the wall, it can still be a connection. If the wall itself is at least 10 tefachim high, gava asara, right? So it's about 30 inches, let's say, v'rochav arba'a, and it is also 4 tefachim wide. Now it doesn't have to have any width. It can even be a curtain or just a picket fence between them, and that would count as a barrier. But as we'll see in a moment, there's another question of what is the designation of the space on top of this fence. So if it's a brick wall or it's a stone fence wall between these two courtyards, and it is 4 tefachim wide, let's say 12 inches or so. So ma'arvin shnayim, they can only make 2 separate eruvs, each courtyard alone. Ve'em ma'arvin echad, and they can't make an eruv together because they now have a wall between them without a window or a door opening. And therefore, if there's a basket of fruit on top of the wall, and the wall now is an independent space because it is 4 tefachim wide, they can the members of each side are allowed to reach up to the top of this wall and eat something there, but you can't bring it down to the courtyard. According to Rashi and according to Tosfos, they can't bring it back into the house. Now, nifratza hakosel. However, if there's a breach in the wall, so even they had a wall, they had a fence, it was a complete barrier between the two, and now there's a breach. It isn't the proper doorway. It's just that there's a broken part of the wall. Ad eser amos ma'arvin shnayim ve'imratzim ma'arvin echad. If it's up until 10 amos, so let's say 15, 16 feet of a gap in the wall, so then we can say that it still retains, each courtyard retains its independence. However, it also has the connection if they want it, and so they can make an independent eruv, and if they want, they can join the eruv. Because right now it just acts as a doorway. However, if the breach is larger than 10 tefachim, so they were going to say they can only be a single entity eruv, and they are one large courtyard because there's a gap of more than 10 tefachim, 10 amos, more than 15, 16 feet. So they don't count as independent courtyards. They're one large courtyard. Ein by arba, mai. What happens if the top of the roof, on top of this wall, does not have 4 tefachim? So we saw earlier in the Masechta at the beginning that there are 4 types of categories of domains. There's a public domain on a Torah level. A public domain has to have 16 amos wide, a public thoroughfare that runs from one end of the city to the other, and easily travelable, so it can't have many curves or hills. And it services, according to Rashi and many Rishonim, it services 600,000 people. So it has criteria. The private domain, which is enclosed. A Carmelis, which is the in-between, is sort of like a rabbinic public domain. And then we had Makom Potter. And Makom Potter is a place that doesn't have enough of a qualification to be a domain. So in this fence, that is 10 tefachim high, so it is its own space, but it doesn't have 4 tefachim wide, so it's not really a usable space. That would be a makom patur. an exempt area, and you can actually put things down on there from a public domain or from a private domain, and it will not count as carrying. So this space, this fence between the two walls, how do we define it? If it doesn't have 4 tefachim wide, what designation will it get? So Amar Rav says, Avir shtei reshuya sholtes by, since it is usable and services both of these courtyards, so the airspace of both of the courtyards are essentially over this fence that doesn't have its own space because it's not 4 tefachim wide. And therefore, you can't even move anything there, even a hair's breadth, because it essentially, the way Rashi explains it is that this is not enough of a space to be a part of either, and therefore neither of the areas, neither of the courtyards are allowed to have any movement on top of that fence. However, now we're on 77a, Ayin Zayin Amid Aleph. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Elu ma'alin mikan, these can bring up from their courtyard onto the top of this fence because it's an independent space that's a makom poter, a permissible space. And they can eat up there, and they can bring up from their courtyard and eat there. In other words, that either courtyard, both courtyards are allowed to utilize that space because it's a makom poter.
They're sharing the meal, or what? They each can eat their own basket, or they can share each other's baskets.
No, each one can bring items from their courtyard onto the top of that fence and put it there or partake in it, whatever it is, meaning that space is available for them to put things on.
But when I'm at, if you and I have a face spent between us, you put a basket of fruit up there, can I go up there and eat fruit from your basket?
We'll see that in a moment. Meaning, can you pass things over to the other side through that way? We'll see that in a moment. Tanan. So we learned in our Mishnah, these can go up there and partake of what's on top of the fence, and the other side as well, but not that they can bring it up, but they cannot bring it up on top of there. So the Gemara says, yeah, of course, but our Mishnah is talking about that the fence is 4 tefachim wide, and Rabbi Yochanan was talking about that it wasn't 4 tefachim wide. If the fence is 4 tefachim wide, so in malin, you can't bring anything from the courtyard onto there because it's an independent space. Whereas if it's less than 4 tefachim, malin nami, then you're even allowed to bring stuff up from the courtyard onto the top of the fence. Now, Tosfos asks over here, this is so obviously the distinction that the Gemara itself made. What did the Gemara first think the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan was? Obviously, the reason is that the fence is less than 4 tefachim, and our Mishnah is talking about that the fence was more than 4 tefachim wide. So, what did the Gemara at first think why Rabbi Yochanan said it was permissible? And the Gemara is going to, Tosfos says that this is basically related to the next Gemara, which is what Michael spoke about. We saw earlier in the Masechta that, and we're going to see this again, that if there is a space that is defined as a makom poter, it doesn't have the requisite requirements to the dimensions to be a private independent space. In other words, it's not 4x4 or not 10 tefachim high. So that qualifies as a makom poter. And even from a public domain, you can put items there onto it. Or from a private domain, you can put items onto it. So you have this ledge, or think of, let's say, a fire hydrant or something like that, which is not the requisite amount of 10 tefachim high, let's say 30 inches, and 4x4, which is about 12 by 12 inches. So it doesn't have its own domain, and so therefore you're allowed to take something from a private domain and put it in there, even though that it is in the public sphere, and vice versa. You're allowed to take something from the public domain and put it on there, even though that you're carrying from a public space into another space. However, you're not allowed to take something from the public space, put it on there, and someone from the private space is then going to take it in, because essentially then you're going to pass right? You're going to come to pass something from the public domain to the private domain, which is a Torah prohibition. That's the reason that the Gemara first thought Rabbi Yochanan was referring to, that you're allowed to put something on this ledge, and you're not concerned that someone from the other courtyard is going to take it down, and then essentially passing from courtyard to courtyard. And Rabbi Yochanan was not concerned about it because people don't usually use the top of a fence if it's not at least 4 tefachim wide. And on that, the Gemara says no. The Gemara question, wait, but our Mishnah says that you can only use what's on top of it. You can't pass it. To which the Gemara says there's a distinction between something that's 4 tefachim wide or not. And here Rabbi Yochanan follows his opinion that we saw elsewhere. Because when Rav Dimi, who, as we've seen many times, traveled from the academies of Eretz Yisrael to the academies of Bavel and back to teach the teachings of either academy to the other, so he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he would say, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan taught. Makom she'ein ba arba al arba. If the dimension of the top of the dimension of this space is less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, so it's not 12 by 12, approximately, inches. Mutter levnei rishus harabim ulevnei rishus hayachid l'katev alav. Both the people from the private domain and the people from the public domain may put their items onto there to relax their shoulders. As long as they don't pass that way by putting something down and the people from the other domain take it, because then essentially people get used to passing and they're going to pass in a Torah prohibition from private domain to public domain. So the Gemara says, Rav Lesle Rav Dimi. Rav disagrees with this teaching of Rabbi Yochanan that Rav Dimi brought from from Eretz Yisrael. He does agree to that. So the Gemara says, you're right. If it was a Torah prohibition, so then it's true, because people are careful. Since it's a Torah prohibition, people are going to be careful, and they're not going to switch the items from one domain to another, because they know that I have to put it down on this ledge, and I can't just pass it to the other person, otherwise I'll transgress it to a Torah prohibition. But however, but not carrying from one courtyard to another courtyard is a rabbinic enactment, because really the courtyards are private domain. It only acts as a public domain since it services multiple homes in each courtyard. So it's like a public right of way, and people consider it a public domain, but it's really a private domain. And therefore, to carry from one courtyard to another in people's minds is rabbinic, and people are lenient about that. And according to Rav, the Chachamim were stricter to uphold the rabbinic enactment, because otherwise people are going to be lenient, and then they're going to come to Torah transgression elsewhere. And that's why, according to Rav, you may not put something down on that fence between two courtyards. But he does agree to Rabbi Yochanan that you can put something down on a ledge on the side of a public domain, even though that same ledge is being used by someone from the private domain as well. Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Rabbi Rav Huna said, Amar Nachman, name Rav Nachman. What happens if you have two courtyards that are side by side? However, the courtyards themselves are at different dimensions, at different heights, elevations, meaning that the courtyard A has a 10 tefachim wall. However, the courtyard on the other side is higher and only has, let's say, 8 tefachim. So the level of the courtyard, of one courtyard, is higher up than the level of the other courtyard. And so the 10 tefachim fence on one side is actually less, maybe only 8 on the other side. So it counts as a fence to separate the two courtyards because one of them has a 10 tefachim fence. However, on the other side, it is less than the 10 tefachim, and it's within its normal usage space. So Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said that the top space of that fence the airspace of the fence belongs to the courtyard that is higher elevation, meaning that is less than 10 tefachim wall, because it is an easier usage for them. So it's within their space. Because one has an easy usage of this space and the other has a hard usage or more difficult usage of this space. And whenever there's a space between two domains, two properties, and one of them can utilize that space easily while the other has more difficulty utilizing the space, it goes the usage of that space goes to the one who has an easier usage. Amar Shizvi Amar Nachman. So Shizvi said in the name of Nachman, in a similar way, it would be if it's not a fence between them, but they have a ditch between the two courtyards. And being that one courtyard is a higher elevation, from the higher elevation into the ditch, it's 10 tefachim, whereas from the lower elevation into the ditch, it's only 8 tefachim. So it's less than the full fence. It does separate the two courtyards where they can't make an eruv between them each other, even though that they see each other properly. Since there is a 10 tefachim ditch between them, that's going to count as a requisite amount to divide the two. However, who has rights to use that ditch? It's going to be the courtyard that has less than 10 tefachim depth in it. To one side, it's 10 tefachim deep. And to the other side, it is less than 10 tefachim deep. In other words, it is within the level of the ground. So we give it the rights of usage in that ditch to the courtyard that has an easier usage. Again, for the same reason, because one has an easy usage of that ditch and one has a difficult usage. The Gemara says, I need both of these teachings. Utsricha. And I need it by a fence and I need it by a ditch. Perhaps I would say by elevations, by ledges, like a fence top. People utilize that. Aval charitz, but a ditch, ba'umko, in the depth, people don't utilize that space so much, and therefore perhaps we don't give it to the one who has an easier usage because it actually doesn't have that much usage. And if we set it by a ditch, because when you do use it, it feels safe. You put it in there and it seems like it'll remain in there. But by a wall, where there is a danger using something and putting something on top of a fence because it may actually fall off, right? So and so it's less common to use or you're not comfortable using it. So perhaps that's not going to count as a usage. And therefore, it requires each of the teachings to tell you that if one of the courtyards has access to this usage in less than 10 tefachim, and the other side is 10 tefachim, so the one who has an easier usage is going to get the rights to that courtyard, to that space. So the courtyard that has access easier to that space is going to have the rights to use it. Back to our first conversation. You have a wall between the two courtyards, and that wall doesn't have an opening or a window. So in our Mishnah told us that you cannot join an eruv between one courtyard and the other. Here the conversation is going to turn to, is there a way that we can make this courtyard, make this wall crossable, if you would, so that it now can, even though I don't have a window or a wall or a door, I can get over the wall enough that it should count as that it is a single courtyard. So one way we're going to do is bala ma'ata. It's going to minimize the height of the wall. So the Gemara, first things, the way he's minimizing the height of the wall is that he's putting down some sort of ledge, whether it's a rock, a stone, a pile of wood. And now, even though that, let's say the fence was was 15 tefachim high, he now minimized it because he's put a 5 tefach platform or a pile of wood or a pile of dirt and a stone. And now from the top of that, it's less than 10 tefachim over the wall. And so essentially the wall itself, even though that it's only for a small section of the wall of 4 tefachim, but nevertheless, he can get over it. So if the minimization or the lowering of the wall, which essentially at this point we think is raising the ground, is 4 tefachim wide, and Tosfos says 4 by 4, mutter. So then, now you can use the entire top of the wall because essentially you have access to the top of the wall, and the top of the wall is your space. However, but if not, if it is not 4 tefachim wide, so then you can only utilize the space that's right there. So Gemara says, wait, let's analyze this. If this minimization, the raising of the ground, as it were, is enough, even if it's less than 4 tefachim, so then I can use the entire top of the fence. And if it didn't work, then even at the area where I made that platform, since it's not 4 tefachim wide, it's not significant enough, and I can't even use the top of the wall at that space because I'm still lower than the other side, and I don't have a way across to the other side, so that should not count. So why can I use the space that I'm at? Avina says actually what we're talking about is that he pulled out a stone or a brick from this wall and minimized one section of the top, even though that it's not through and through. It is 4 tefachim wide. Now the space from his floor of the courtyard to the missing brick to that area is 10 tefachim. So now I actually created a space in the wall that's less than 10 tefachim high. And so if it's 4 tefachim wide, so now that's a valid space, and therefore I can use the entire fence because I now have a valid space that's within my usability, and so the fence now is all mine because it's 4 tefachim is a significant area. Whereas if it's narrower than 4 tefachim, that's not significant enough. I can use that area, but it doesn't define the rest of the fence. Now, the next attempt of raising the ground, the Gemara is going to talk about if they put in a pot. So you took a large pot, a vessel, and you turn it upside down, whether it's a pot or a basin, any vessel that I have, and I turn it upside down, and now I'm standing on that as my step stool, as it were, and now from there, the top of the wall is less than 10 tefachim. Amar Rav Yechiel. Rav Yechiel said, that it doesn't only have to be you built a platform or a pile of dirt. You turned over a basin, a pot, that's also going to count. The Gemara challenges that. I'm allowed to move that away on Shabbos. I can pick up that pot and take it away. And so it's just a temporary step stool there. So that's not going to count as permanently minimizing the height of the wall and therefore giving me rights to its place and counting as a connection to the next courtyard. That it's a temporary thing. And something that I can remove on Shabbos doesn't count as a space as having minimized the space. The Gemara says what's talking about is that he actually connected it to the ground. He connected the pot to the ground, it sort of wedged it in. So the Gemara says, so what? You're assuming that once he wedged it into the ground, you can't just pull it up. But the halacha is you may. Now, even though you're removing the dirt and so on, yeah, that's not your intention. you're just and you're not actually meaning to make a furrow or to dig there or something. So the Gemara says, Tani, we learned clearly in a brisa, we learned this in the Gemara in Shabbos. Pagashet mina b'tevet. Have an unripened fig, and you want it to ripen, so you put it into a pile of straw. V'charara shet mina b'kacholin, or something that you're baking and or roasting, and you put it into a pile of coals that are embers. Im megula miktsasa, as long as a part of it is uncovered, where you can just pull it out. Nitelas b'Shabbos, you can take that on Shabbos, even though that it's essentially going to move the dirt around it, the straw which around it, and all that's muksa, not movable on Shabbos. But nevertheless, you're just moving the item you want, and the rest of it falls off. And this we saw earlier is called tiltul min hatzad. It is secondary or indirect removal of something. So over here, you could just pull it out. So too over here, you could just pick up this basin, this pot, and even though that it's in the dirt, you can just pick it up and remove it. And so there's no concern of your Shabbos space. There's no value for your Shabbos space because you actually haven't made a permanent connection to the other courtyard. So why over here would you count this as a why would you count this as a step, a permanent step? Even because you can remove it on Shabbos. So Gemara says actually you cannot remove it because this is talking about that this has that the pot has a ledge, and now there's dirt on the ledge. The isle ognayim, that this pot has a ledge. So Gemara says, so what if it has a ledge? A ledge is not going to make any difference for you anyhow. The isle ognayim, I have it. But now we learned that lefes utznoin. Somebody takes turnip or radish and he wants to keep it fresh. They didn't have refrigerators, so they would stick it into the ground. Tachas hagefen, put it underneath a vineyard. Now, that you're not allowed to, in a vineyard, you're not allowed to plant vegetables. It says that doesn't count as planting vegetables, and it's not going to be mixing seeds because it's only there to keep it fresh. It's not going to take root. He's not going to leave it there long enough to take root. So the Gemara, here we go to 77b, Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, Bisman shemiktasa miktsasa ala megulin. As long as some of the greens, the top of the radish or the turnip, are still sticking out, so you can just pull it up and pull it out. Ein chayshish lemishim kalayim, so you don't have to be concerned about mixing the seeds in the vineyard. V'lemishim maser, and you don't have to re-tithe it. Right, new produce has to be tithed. You put it into the ground over here to keep it fresh. That doesn't count as the produce having taken root, and you don't have to tithe it. And even if it's on the 7th year where you have to leave the field fallow, you can do this, and you don't have to be concerned that it's like you're planting or harvesting on the Shemitah year because you're just keeping the vegetable fresh. Shabbos, and you can even remove it on Shabbos because even though that there's dirt all around it, you can just pull it up because you have something to hold on to, and the dirt's going to fall off, and that's not going to be considered moving this muksa. Again, this is tiltul min hatzad, which is permissible. So Gemara says, he says, you're right. We're talking about that he attached it so much that in order to remove this basin, this pot, you have to use a shovel. And therefore, that obviously you cannot do on Shabbos. And so it's you've created a permanent step stool, if you would, at that wall, and it's less than 10 tefachim high. That gives you access to the top and also to the next courtyard. The next halacha said that if you had a sulam hamitzri, eina mamayit, vatsuri mamayit. If you have a wall, a ladder, an Egyptian ladder is going to count as a connection to the next courtyard and gives you access to the top of the fence, whereas a tire from Tyre is going to be okay, whereas an Egyptian will not be okay. So Gemara says, what's the distinction? What is an Egyptian ladder that's not going to count as a good connection? In the Academy of Rabbi Yanai, they taught these are basically a three-step stool. It doesn't have four steps on the ladder, and therefore they are not heavy, and so they're easily you don't keep them in their place. You put them somewhere and then you take it away, and therefore it's a temporary cross over the fence and doesn't count. Amalei Ravacha Berei Rav Ravashi. Say Ravacha Berei Rav challenge Ravashi. My time at the Sulam Mitzri Delay Memayim. What's the reason of the Egyptian ladder that it doesn't minimize the side, the wall? It doesn't count as if you can get to the top of the wall. Amalei L'Shemi L'Chad Amar Ravacha Berad Amar Rav Hamnuna Amar Rav. Didn't you hear that teaching in the name of Rav? Mishum Dahave LeDavar Shanita B'Shabbos, because that ladder is essentially there temporarily. You're going to remove it even on Shabbos itself. Anything that you're going to take away on Shabbos is not going to count as minimizing the height of the wall and therefore giving you rights to the top of the wall and over the wall to the next courtyard. So he said, wait, if that's the case, well, then a ladder from Tyre, the Etzuri ladder, will also have the same thing, because it's not that tall. You can move it. So Mara says no. Since they make their steps closer to each other, and it'll have for 10 tefachim, it'll have at least 4 steps there. It makes it heavier, and since it's that heavy, even though that you could remove it, it's not that it's impossible to move. But typically, people will leave it in its spot. And since it is left in its spot, it counts as a permanent access to the top of that fence and over to the other courtyard, and they can make an eruv together, and they both share the usage of the top of that wall. Amar Abaye, if you have a wall between 2 courtyards, and each side put up a ladder against the wall so that they can access it. Now it's like a doorway. Instead of a doorway between the two, what they've created is a step over from one to the other, and that's a valid connection between the 2 courtyards, and they should be able to make an eruv between them. As long as the ladder is 4 tefachim wide, which is 12 inches approximately. Each side has a 4 tefachim ladder. And the ladders are within at least 3 tefachim of each other, meaning they don't have to be exactly across each other. They can even be off, as long as they are within 3 tefachim, roughly 9-10 inches to each other. So that would count as, which we saw as lavud. So they count as as really essentially across each other, and therefore they count as they could connect each other as one. So mamayit, that counts as it has removed a part of the fence, and they can now connect. Shlosha enamamayit. But if the ladders are 3 tefachim away from each other, now they don't have a connection that actually matches up, and therefore they cannot. It counts as if they still have a proper fence between them, and they cannot join in an eruv together. V'lei amran. However, we only said this ella delay have a kaisel arba. That's only if the wall itself is not 4 tefachim wide. Since the wall itself is not 4 tefachim wide, you can't really step on the wall and then go move over to the next ladder and down. So you climb up the ladder, you get to the top of the fence, you have to be able to get down on the other side. And since it is so narrow, you can't step on the fence and walk along it to the next ladder. So the ladder has to be within 3 tefachim, which is essentially considered directly across it. However, if it is moved away, it is more than 4 tefachim, that doesn't count as right there, and you can't, and the fence is too narrow, so you can't walk on it. However, if the fence is more than 4 tefachim, so you can essentially walk along that and then get to the next one and get down, and therefore that's going to count as a good connection to the next courtyard, even if it is more than 3 tefachim away from each other. It could be at the other end of the courtyard, and it'll be fine. Sorry, the other end of the wall in the next courtyard. Even if it's farther away, Nami, it's still going to count as a good connection. Amar Rav Beva bar Abai. Rav Beva said, another way that you can make this connection, Bana itztaba al gab itztaba. You build a platform over another platform. So you basically build, instead of a ladder, you build some ledges. Hatachtoina arba. The first one is 4 tefachim wide. It counts as a proper minimization and lifting of the ground up towards the top of the wall. And now it's within 10 tefachim of the top. And then you build another one as another step. So that's going to minimize the sense of the wall and going to raise your courtyard up to the top of the wall 10 tefachim, within 10 tefachim. Inami emetachtoina arba. But even if the lower one does not have 4 tefachim wide, but the outer one does. The upper one does, and it has legs on the outside of the narrower one. And between the upper ledge and the lower ledge, these two platforms he made are less than 3 tefachim, so therefore they count as lavud, as connected, as we've seen. Anything that's within 3 tefachim of each other counts as connected. And therefore, he now has a good platform that can raise his level of the floor up to the top, within 10 tefachim of the top of the fence, and he can get over, and it would count as a good connection to the other side if they make something similar on the other side. Rav Nachman further said, also, if you made a step ladder, even if the step ladder itself is not going to have this is not step ladder. This is a regular ladder, but it's narrow on one side and wider on the other. So one side of the ladder, whether the bottom or the top, are going to be is going to be 4 tefachim wide, which is the minimum that it requires. So as long as each step is within 3 tefachim of the other, and one end of the ladder is 4 tefachim wide, that's going to be enough. That these steps are floating. As long as the bottom step is 4 tefachim wide, or inami ein mishliva atachtona arba, or the bottom one is not 4 tefachim wide. V'yesh mishliva alyon arba, but the top one is 4 tefachim wide. Ve'ein bein zel lezeh shlosha, and there is not enough space, airspace between each step of 3. That's going to count as a good connection to the other side. So the ladder, even though at the first step we said the ladder has to be 4 tefachim wide, it doesn't have to be the entire ladder is 4 tefachim wide. According to Rashi, the interpretation here is going to be that one, either the bottom or the top shelf is a step of 4 tefachim wide, and that's going to count as a good connection to the other side. The other Rishonim learned that this is not talking about a ladder. This is talking about a step ladder that has no support. Essentially shelves, and that you're walking up, and either the bottom one is going to be 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, or the top one is going to be 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, and you're going to step on these and walk over. And there isn't, since even though there's no support on the outer side, it's going to count as a valid step ladder across to the other side. The next Gemara is going to talk about if you made an actual platform and made a ladder to that platform. V'amar Rav Nachman and Rav Baravua. Rav Nachman further said in the name of Rabbi Baravua. Now we're on 78a. We're going on to the beginning of the next daf. Ziz hayotze min hakosel. He's got a protrusion, whether it's a part of the wall and it's like a rock that's sticking out, or a piece of wood that's sticking out, or you actually built a platform sticking out of the fence. Dalit al dalit. If it is 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, 12 by 12 inches, ve'niach olav sulam, and then he leaned a ladder against it so that you can actually get to it. Kol shehu miuta. Even if it's a very narrow ladder, the ladder itself is not going to be 4 tefachim wide. It's going to be okay because you're not using the ladder as your width of space, removing space of the wall. The platform itself is what's minimizing the wall for 4 tefachim. The ladder is simply giving you access to that space. So the ladder can be minimally wide and it will count. However, it has to be that the ladder is leaning on that ledge, on that platform. However, if you have the ladder leaning against the wall and the platform is freestanding, you'd have to walk up that ladder and then step onto the wall at its side. That won't count. If you didn't put the steps against it, or rather it is against the wall, so now this platform is just essentially in the air. It's an empty space. Nothing counts as it's not connected to the ground and not connected to the top of the wall, and it's just a free floating space in the middle, and it doesn't minimize the 10 tefachim space of the wall, and will not give you access halachically to the other courtyard. We'll continue with these halachas tomorrow. Have a good day.